guys, Miss Landry here, and we are going to go over different types of data today. Pretty short video, so let's just jump right in. This is lesson 1.6. The first type of data I want you to know is primary versus secondary data. So it's pretty simple. Primary data is something that you yourself collected. It can be either qualitative or quantitative, but basically you're the one that's going to control the quality of this data. This can cost more if you're in the lab, but it's definitely worth it because you have a lot more control over the type of data that you're going to collect. Then there's secondary data. This is data that's collected by someone else. It can, again, be either quantitative or qualitative. Sometimes you're going to go and use data in your claim, evidence, and reasoning that you got from peer-reviewed journals, for example. That would be an example of secondary data. So you can use your own along with someone else's if it supports your claim. The problem is you got to really look at two things with secondary data. Number one, where is it coming from? So remember to be critical of the data and where you're getting it. Make sure that it's from a peer-reviewed source, and we'll talk about what that is in class. And then secondly, check the date of where you're getting it. If it's kind of old, if the data may not be good anymore, there may be some better experimental procedures out there that have either debunked that data or for some reason it just is too old. So make sure that you're very careful about using other people's data. Okay, next we're going to get into the types of data in terms of how you collect it. So the first I want you to know is quantitative. And I really want you to think about the root words in science, okay? This is, when I think of quantitative, you should automatically be thinking quantity, all right? And a quantity is a number. So this is a type of data that expresses a certain quantity, an amount of something, or a range of something. It is always numerical, so you'll always have a number associated with this. Now there's two types of quantitative data I want you to know. I want you to know continuous quantitative data. So these are measurements that are done on a continuum. So the easiest one I can think of to give you an example would be human's height. Right? So you can fall anywhere in a range. There's not well, you can be 5'6", but not 5'6.5". So it's this continuum. They can basically have any numerical value within that range. And I think a lot of data that we'll collect, especially on the plant lab, is going to be continuous. The other type of data that you can collect, that is quantitative is called discrete. So discrete is still measured, it is still numerical, but it has breaks in it, right? Meaning it can be categorized. So an example of this might be, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. A good example of this might be number of people who purchased white cars versus blue cars. There's not a continuum in there, right? There's not somebody who bought a half a white car and a half a blue car, although there might be. But think of discrete as being in chunks, okay, where they're basically counts of things. So that is quantitative data. Let's move on to qualitative data. So in qualitative data, this is non-numerical. So these are things that you basically collect with your senses, kind of like observations, right? And these are just as important as quantitative data. So it can be things like, how does something feel? Is it soft? Is it prickly? Is it, how does it smell? Does it smell like a certain chemical? It can be what you're hearing. So do you hear a high pitch? Do you hear a low pitch? So notice those don't have numbers associated with them. Okay, so again, we're looking at categorical data. Again, there's two types. So the first type is called nominal, and the root word for that is nomen. It's Latin, and it means name. So this is where we label things. Okay, so for example, what how many people in our what color is your hair? Okay, so mine is a beautiful silver or white. Where do you live? United States, Europe. So think about something that isn't numerical, but you're still looking at groups of people. So it's how we label things. And then the second type of qualitative data is ordinal. These have numbers, but it's only because we're categorizing things a certain way. So for example, I have an example here on a graph. So this was looking at how happy people were in different hotels, I believe. So in the rooms, were you satisfied with the room? Were you not satisfied? And basically they're ranking the happiness of the people, which is not numerical. But because we're ranking it, that makes it ordinal, which is numbers. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's a little confusing. But think about your fact, like if you can put it into categories like you're seeing here, and the categories on the bottom are not numerical, then you definitely have qualitative data. And we can talk about that some more as we do some practice. The last kind I want to talk about is an interesting type of data. It's called binomial. This basically has only two outcomes. Okay, so it can be yes, no, it can be true, false, it can be 1, 0. That's where it comes from, the binary system. An example of this would be tossing a coin. So if you were to do like a quarter flip, and I have a great graph here of how many times heads comes up. So we flipped a coin 50 times, and how many times did heads come up? Obviously, the average is going to be 25, and this is how many times when we did 50 flips, it came up to that number, if that makes sense. Look at how many it came in. It's kind of funny to think. So most of them are under 35 times, which is interesting. But if you look at how many are over 35, it's this tiny little bit right here, right? So if you look at the events, and I think that's where that little poem comes up. Tails, tails never fails. So always go for tails. Now, I think that is it for this video, nice and short. You do have some practice to do after this. It is a must do. So when you go on to Canvas, it is under Canvas, lesson 1.6, must do practice. There are 4 levels of questions on this practice. Bronze, everybody has to do. Silver, everybody has to do. I want you to challenge yourself to do gold. That will give you 1 extra credit point. And then I want you to really challenge yourself to do platinum, and that will give you 2 extra credit points. You can find it on Canvas under lesson 1.6, and it is right there. Thanks, guys. Have a fantastic night.